We live in a culture that teaches men a dangerous lesson. If you want something, you must pursue it relentlessly. If you're rejected, you're expected to insist, explain, prove, and fight to change her mind. Silence in this narrative is framed as weakness. Walking away is seen as losing, and accepting a no without resistance is often mistaken for lack of confidence. But that belief is not only flawed, it's costly. When a man is rejected, nearly everything around him pushes him toward reaction, messages, justifications, emotional bargaining, as if his worth is measured by how convincingly he can argue for his place in someone else's life. And in that moment, most men don't realize what they're actually giving away, their center. This is where silence is misunderstood. Silence is not surrender, it is not punishment, and it is not a strategy to manipulate or provoke guilt. Conscious silence is something far more powerful, a declaration of emotional independence. It is the moment a man decides, without drama or resentment, that he will not chase validation where it is not freely given. This message is not about games, it's about discipline. It's about self-respect, so grounded that it doesn't need to announce itself. Because when a man stops reacting impulsively and starts acting from clarity, the entire dynamic changes, internally first and externally as a result. What follows will break down, step by step, what truly happens when you choose silence over insistence. Not to control her, but to reclaim yourself. When a woman rejects a man, she rarely expects a clean ending. What she anticipates is a reflex, a familiar sequence she has seen countless times before. The follow-up message, the request for clarity, the emotional explanation, the subtle attempt to negotiate her decision. These reactions are so common that they've become predictable. Most men don't realize this, but rejection often comes with an unspoken expectation that the man will try again. So when you don't, something unexpected happens. By choosing silence, not coldness, not bitterness, just quiet withdrawal, you step out of a script she assumed you would follow. There's no drama to respond to, no ego to feed, no reassurance to receive. The absence of reaction interrupts the emotional flow she was prepared for, and that interruption creates friction in her mind. This silence is not a pause. It's a statement. You are not saying, "I don't care." You are saying, "I respect your decision, and I respect myself enough not to argue against it." That distinction matters more than most men realize. While others rush to fill the space with words, you allow the moment to stand as it is, complete, final, and dignified. In doing so, you remove yourself from the pool of men who compete for attention after rejection. You don't try to stand out among those who insist. You exit the game entirely. And paradoxically, that's what makes you noticeable. Unpredictability is not created by doing more. It's created by doing less, but with intention. When you don't behave like everyone else, you stop being classified like everyone else. And that quiet deviation is often the first shift in power. What many men fail to understand is that not every rejection comes from genuine disinterest. In some cases, a no is less about closing a door and more about checking what still exists behind it. It can be a way to gauge influence, to confirm desirability, or to see whether emotional control is still intact. In those moments, a reaction is expected, a message, a question, a need for reassurance, any signal that says, "You still matter enough for me to respond." And when that signal arrives, it restores a sense of power. The rejection has served its purpose, but when silence follows instead, something very different happens. Your lack of response doesn't bring comfort. It creates emptiness, and that emptiness is unsettling because it removes the feedback she was unconsciously waiting for. There is no validation to collect, no emotional reaction to measure. The dynamic she assumed would continue simply stops. Silence in this context communicates something without saying a word. I don't need external approval to remain grounded. That message cannot be debated, challenged, or negotiated. It stands on its own. By not reacting, you quietly shift the balance. You are no longer seeking affirmation. You are demonstrating emotional self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency removes leverage. When someone cannot influence your emotional state, their control weakens. This isn't about winning or punishing. It's about refusing to participate in an exchange where your value is tested through reaction. The man who remains centered after rejection shows something rare: discipline. And discipline, unlike attention, cannot be taken, only recognized. Silence doesn't escalate tension, it dissolves it, and in doing so, it removes the power others assume they hold over you. At first, she was the one who said no. The decision felt controlled, contained, and emotionally safe. Often, that kind of rejection carries an assumption that the connection isn't truly over, that your attention will remain accessible, that some form of presence will continue even after the boundary is set. But when you don't return, when there are no follow-up messages, no attempts to soften the moment, no effort to remain in her orbit, the emotional dynamic begins to shift. What started as a rejection slowly transforms into a sense of loss. You didn't argue. You didn't seek closure. You didn't try to be remembered favorably. You simply accepted the situation and moved on. And that calm departure changes the meaning of the interaction. Without intending to, you reverse the emotional roles. Now it is not you waiting for resolution. It is her sitting with unanswered questions. The silence you chose removes her ability to control the narrative. She can no longer frame the ending as something she managed or extended at will. The chapter didn't fade out on her terms. It ended because you allowed it to end. This is not about making her feel rejected in return. It's about refusing to linger in a space where you were no longer invited, and that refusal carries weight. The man who leaves quietly communicates strength without display. He doesn't need to assert power. He embodies it. When someone watches you walk away without resistance, the mind often interprets it as choice. And the moment it feels like you chose to leave, the emotional balance shifts, not through confrontation, but through composure. Most emotional decisions are made in the moment. They're influenced by mood, timing, context, and internal uncertainty rather than clear logic. A rejection, in many cases, is not a final evaluation. It's a snapshot of how someone felt at a specific point in time. When a man reacts immediately, he gives that decision reinforcement. His words offer reassurance that the choice was correct. His pursuit removes space for reflection. Noise, even well-intended, closes the door on doubt. Silence does the opposite. By stepping away without protest, you deny her the opportunity to confirm her decision through your reaction. There is no emotional feedback to analyze, no behavior to interpret as proof that she was right. And in that quiet, something subtle begins to happen. Questions emerge. Did I decide too quickly? Did I misread him? Was there more there than I allowed myself to see? These doubts don't appear because you tried to persuade her. They appear because you didn't. Your absence becomes a mirror, one that reflects not neediness or disappointment, but composure. And that reflection can be uncomfortable because it introduces the possibility that the judgment was incomplete. Distance creates perspective. Without constant interaction, memory softens, emotional defenses lower, and curiosity replaces certainty. You are no longer framed by the moment of rejection, but by how you handled it. Silence gives space for reconsideration without pressure. And pressure is often what kills interest. When you don't insist on being reevaluated, you paradoxically invite evaluation on new terms. You didn't make a case for yourself. You let your restraint speak instead, and restraint has a way of planting questions that words never could. When a man disappears without conflict, explanation, or emotional residue, he doesn't fade. He lingers, not because he tried to be memorable, but because the mind struggles with what it cannot neatly categorize. Most interactions end with clarity, agreement, rejection, or emotional resolution. Silence disrupts that process. By not explaining yourself, you leave no definitive story behind. You are no longer the man who tried again or the man who couldn't accept no. You become something far less common, the man who respected the boundary and moved forward without needing recognition. That absence of narrative creates mental friction. There is no label to apply, no emotional box to place you in. Mystery is not created through performance, it's created through restraint. You didn't attempt to appear confident. You simply behaved as someone who didn't need to prove anything. And that authenticity is what makes the silence resonate. It invites reflection rather than reaction. She is left to interpret your behavior without guidance, and interpretation always carries more emotional weight than explanation. Was he never that invested, or did he know his worth well enough to walk away? That unanswered question sustains attention far longer than reassurance ever could, not because you intended it to, but because the human mind seeks closure, and you didn't provide it. You didn't deny it either. You simply didn't chase it. This is not manipulation, it's alignment. You acted in accordance with your values, not in pursuit of an outcome. And when a man's actions are internally consistent, they create gravity. Not noise, not persuasion, gravity. The man who doesn't resolve himself for others becomes unforgettable. Not by force, but by presence. Most men don't lose power in dramatic moments. They lose it quietly, through over-explaining, through chasing clarity, through trying to be chosen after they've already been dismissed. Power drains away when self-worth becomes conditional on someone else's response. Silence interrupts that pattern. When you stop engaging after rejection, you are not conceding defeat. You are reclaiming authority over where your energy goes. You are no longer reacting from wounded pride or emotional urgency. You are acting from decision. And decision is where real strength lives. This is how power is regained, not through confrontation, not through proving a point, but through alignment. You chose not to argue for a place you were not freely offered. You chose peace over persuasion. And that choice sends a clear signal, even if it's never spoken. I value myself enough to walk away without resentment. That kind of self-respect doesn't demand recognition, but it often earns it. Not because the other person feels guilty or impressed, but because composure is difficult to ignore. When someone realizes they couldn't provoke emotion, couldn't trigger insecurity, couldn't pull you into reaction, respect quietly replaces control. You didn't win by convincing her. You didn't win by outlasting her resistance. You won because you didn't abandon yourself in the process. The man who can disengage without bitterness is a man who is no longer governed by external validation. And that freedom is the deepest form of power there is, the kind that doesn't need conflict to exist and doesn't disappear when someone says no.